Hey, welcome to the walkthrough video for Streets of Steel, our new board game. Even though we're in front of a wall of high heavens here at Wild Power Games headquarters, we're going to be focusing on this demo copy right now. Of course, through the Kickstarter, we're hoping to not only upgrade this and bring in some new stretch goals that you might not see here, but of course, when it finally gets produced, all the materials will be of higher quality than what you see on the table. So first thing we're going to do is jump into the components. Over here, we have all the elements that a player will keep in front of them. The game is going to come with both plastic minis and cardboard stand-ups with pixel art on them. So people can play the way that they wish. If you choose one, you're going to remove the other from the game. You have a player dashboard, which also shows you your player's stats and their super attacks. So for example, if we start with Average Joe, he has, you can see he has 5 hearts above him. That's his maximum health, which you can see is written down right here. He also has a maximum of 4 wild power. That's the symbol that you see here in blue. And that's also the symbol that shows you what token to use when you want to either do a super attack or you want to force a die to re-roll, which we'll get into later. Every character starts with just 1 wild power. Moving along, you see your maximum movement. For Joe, it's 2. You see how many dice to roll when you attack. So for Joe, he rolls 2 punches and 2 kicks, all at the same time for every attack. Below that, you see his super attack dash, which shows you that for 4 wild power, you can do his nothing special move. And then for 1 wild power, you can do a combo. Every character has unique special attacks, and they all cost different amounts of wild power. Next, we'll go to the street tiles. So here you see 3 tiles have been exposed, and you'll notice that they have green one-way symbols on them. That shows that these are the easiest in difficulty, and that's how you start the game. There's also yellow, which is medium, and on the bottom is red, which is where the boss lives. At the beginning of each game, you will shuffle your tiles, choose the right amount of street tiles for your game, and then stack them green to yellow to red. On a street tile, there's a basic anatomy, which is lanes, which are these single skinny columns that you see running down. Each street tile has 4 of them. There's columns, which is 2 of them put together. There's squares, which make up these groupings here. And then finally, the whole street tile. When a character moves, if I grab Candy, for example, you move across entire spaces. So each tile has 6 spaces. The importance of the lanes comes during combat, which we'll get into later. Also, you'll notice that there are little police beacons on each tile. Those are called your threat indicators, and those tell you what baddie should spawn on this street tile when a new street tile appears. So you can see that threat level 1s spawn here, threat level 2s spawn here, and so on. These will also ramp up in difficulty as the game moves on. You can also see a few different items here. These have, by the time you're watching this video, these are already changed art and interface-wise. But for now, these will show us that this is rough terrain, and this is where a crate will go. So crates are ways to grab items, which we'll talk about. And rough terrain changes the way that movement works for a player character. Next are the item cards. Item cards are flipped when a player cracks open a crate. So for example, if Candy was there and she decided to open a crate, she removes the crate from the board, grabs an item card. Each item card is unique and becomes the player's, and they are usable in different ways. So here's the player 1 token, which is obviously temp, but this allows you to know who starts off the player round. And at the end of each round, when we get through the phases, you'll see this is going to pass to the right, even though play passes to the left. Here we have wild power tokens, which will be used by the players to either play their special attacks or to force a die to be re-rolled. So at any time during the game, if you or a baddie that is rolling against you roll a die that you do not like, you can take one of your wild power from your dashboard, throw it back to the bank, and force that die to re-roll. You can continue to do that as long as you have wild power. The hearts simply show how much health you have, and when you have 0 hearts on your dashboard, your player dies. On the back of every player dashboard shows a dead hero, and you can revive a dead hero by taking 1 quarter from the game. You're going to start the game with a certain number of quarters based on the difficulty that you want to set. So, for example, here we have 1 quarter per player. So when Average Joe dies, he can take a quarter, and when play comes back to him, he pays the quarter back to the box, flips his hero card again, and he's back in the game. When you run out of quarters, you are not allowed to bring heroes back into the game. Finally, there are obstacles and crates. The crates go on the board when you set up a street tile, and that's the thing that holds items. And obstacles are used when, in this particular case, when the boss mutie uses some of his abilities, he will create rough terrain on the board. Rough terrain, when you walk into those spaces, it instantly stops your movement. So you will use up the entirety of your action moving into one of these spaces. And then after that, if you have actions, you can continue moving on. For the dice, these are prototypes, and these will be a lot nicer looking when we ship the real game. But the 3 types of dice we have here are punch dice, which are yellow and have fists on them. These are very reliable dice. They have 1 fist on 4 sides and are missing fists on 2. So it's very highly likely that you will score a point on these dice, and they will never be more than 1 point. The kick dice can either be blank, a single kick, or a double kick. So the potential for damage is higher on these dice, and you can see that there's a 1 kick on 1 side, 2 on 2 sides, and the rest are blank. So higher likelihood of doing more damage, but also higher likelihood of missing. And then finally, there's danger dice. These typically come into play with regards to when the game is controlling things. So, for example, the baddies. These also have 3 blank sides, but have 2 single hits and 1 double. And you'll use these for hazards and for baddies. The whole game is run off of these dice, and these are the things that you will re-roll using wild power. For setting up Streets of Steel, you will pretty much set it up like this, or in a similar way that suits you. You'll have the 3 tiles that start the game, plus the full deck of other tiles. Every player will have their dashboard in front of them, plus their mini and all their tokens. Cards can go off to the side. You'll have your bank of tokens and your dice off to the side. And then you'll want to keep your baddie dashboards up so you can see all their stats while you're playing the game. Remember that the game comes with both plastic minis and cardboard minis, so when you start the game, just remove the ones that you're not going to be using. At the bottom of this deck is the single street tile that contains the boss. When that flips, side-scrolling stops, the board stays put, and the boss comes out. In this case, the boss mutie. When you defeat the boss, the game is over. Or, conversely, if the boss or baddies defeat all of the heroes, the game is also over. At the beginning of the game, you'll have 3 tiles flipped, and when new tiles are flipped, you always spawn bad guys based on their threat level. Now, even though there's a lot of bad guys that will be showing up here, you have to remember that there's only 3 minis allowed on a single space. So at no point will the game overwhelm the player to the point where it is unbeatable. So to explain that more clearly, there will never be more than 3 figures, hero or bad guy, on a single space. So continuing the setup, I will grab some firebugs and put them on all the 2s. There's just 1 figure per spawn point. I will choose where the heroes get to choose where they start the game. It must be in this first column, but you can choose where in the first column you start. And I can do this, for example, so no baddies can creep in on us. And now I'm ready to play the game. During the player phase, the player has 3 actions, and they can do one of 4 things with those 3 actions in any way that they like. They can move, they can attack, they can super attack, or they can taunt. Starting with movement, let's say Candy were player 1. She can move up to 3 movement on her turn. So I can choose to go, let's say, 1, 2, 3. Now, typically, I would have to take backstabs against both of those firebugs. But because this is the first turn and the first action of my first turn, the player is invincible. They're sort of blinking as if it was the old video games. So they're allowed to move right through bad guys only on their first turn and only on the first action of their first turn. So that was one of my actions. The second one I can do is to move again. So I'll move here and stop at 1, so I don't take a backstab from the punk, and also so I can fight the punk. With my third action, I'm going to choose a straight fight. So I'm going to use a single attack, which is 1 kick and 3 punches. So I take 1 kick die and 3 punches, and I roll against the punk. Now, the punk's threshold is 2, so I need a 2 or more. So it's highly likely that I'll be able to do this. So I scored 3 punches against the punk's threshold of 2. So the punk is removed from the board, and you can see that his wild power bounty is 1. So I gain 1 wild power for Candy. Next, we'll do super attacks. If I want, I can use Candy's special delivery ability and pay 2 wild power, so I'll do that, to move an adjacent hero 1 space. So for example, if the mayor was sharing this space with her, I can push him forward a little bit to help him get out of tricky situations. And finally, there's taunt. If a player chooses, they can simply stand still and get 1 wild power from the game for taunting the enemies. This will allow them to re-roll dice later, or maybe use more super attacks. After each player takes their turn, the baddies activate. On a baddie's turn, you just go to the baddie behavior deck and take the top card and read it. So this is Sucker Punch, and the punks activate, and it's move 2 towards the nearest hero and attack with 1 punch. Now, if there were no punks on the board, I would move down and you would see the draw new card icon, but there are punks on the board, so I'm going to be able to keep and activate this card. Now, I will keep this out here. Starting over here on the left, I start in the top corner and just move down each column, activating bad guys as I come across them. So because I'm doing punks, I'll start with this guy. So he's going to move 2 towards the nearest hero. Now you can see that I can go, the nearest hero is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a tie. I can move to a hero on 4. Now I can't reach them either way, but just for the sake of using the tiebreaker, I'll see that he prefers red over green. So I can move 2 towards her, and it's player's choice, so 1, 2. This baddie is not going to make it into a space with Average Joe, and therefore can't attack. The next punk that comes up is this guy, and he's going to move 2 towards the nearest. And again, I have a tie, green and red, and I know they prefer red, so I go 1, 2. Baddies ignore rough terrain, and now I'm going to move him into the fighting lane, and I'll do a little bit of an attack on Joe. Remember, the attack was 1 punch, so I simply roll 1. I take a hit. Now, as the player, Joe has a choice. He can either allow 1 heart to be removed and 1 step closer to death, or he can choose to use up his wild power, throw it back to the bank, and force that die to re-roll. Now, this is pretty risky because the punch dice hit 4 out of 6 times, but we'll give it a shot. And he takes the hit, therefore losing his wild power and the health. If it was a success, Joe would be able to keep his health, but of course lose that wild power. Once you've played all the punks on the board, let's say this guy did his thing, You remove that, put it next to the deck into a discard, and move to the next player's turn. In a round, you'll do a player, then the baddies, a player again, baddies again, all the way around the table to the left until all players and the corresponding baddies have gone, and then you hit the street phase. On the street phase, you remove all figures from the leftmost street tile. That means both baddies and heroes. Anything that is on that street tile, when it is removed, dies. This gets pulled from the game, set aside. Then the game side scrolls, which is simply scrolling these guys over to the side and pulling a new card. Now this new street tile is yellow, which means it'll be slightly more difficult, and I spawn new baddies everywhere that I'm told. So a punk will go on 1, the firebugs go on 2, and now the new Kilgaroos come in on 3. I will put a crate there so the players can gain items, and now we have a hazard on the board, and hazards tend to come with crates. So this is the setup of an entire new street. At the end of that setup, you're going to pass the player 1 token to the right and carry on with the next player phase. Here on this tile, you see a hazard has appeared, and it comes with a crate. The way hazards work is that you refer to the behavior deck, and on the back of the behavior deck will be a number that can be anywhere from 0 to 1 to 2. That is the potential amount of damage that you will take by entering that space. So let's say it's Kiki's turn. She uses an action to enter the space. One of the other players will instantly roll a danger die against her. If it's a 0, she suffers no damage. If it is any face with an exclamation point, she suffers the amount of damage that is on the card. So it could be, again, 0, 1, or 2. That means that sometimes you might want to be more aggressive towards getting the items on those spaces if this is at a 0, because you know you won't be hurt. Next, let's talk about the lanes on the spaces. So each space has 2 lanes, and the one on the left is the fight lane, which is typically identified with a little user interface on top. They got a little trimmed off here, but in the final one, it'll be obvious and clear. When it is time for a baddie to activate, so let's say the punks were activating, first thing you do is you reset them to the right lane. Then, going through, you start activating the punks as described in the punk activation section, and you have them move to where you want them to move, and if they're going to attack, they go into the fight lane. So I can move him here, have him attack, and then if it's this guy's turn, I can move him in, have him attack, and finally, if it's this punk's turn, I can have him try and move, but you'll remember there's only 3 figures allowed in a space, so no new figures can enter here, and so no one can enter the fight lane either. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, just drop them down in the comments, and see you soon.